Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 3.38, and in this lesson we're going to be taking a look at Bitwig's digital distortion device, which they have aptly named the Bit-8. If you haven't already seen the video where we talk about different types of file compression and sample rates and bit depth, I encourage you to go back and watch those, because a lot of these parameters and stuff are suddenly going to make a lot of sense in relationship to what we've already talked about, and then into the Bit-8 device itself and about digital distortion. So I'm not going to talk again about digital distortion and what it exactly means, which I guess I will quickly. Once you go over 0 in the digital domain, you are digitally distorting, you are clipping, and this clipping doesn't occur at consonant intervals like it will when you're using certain types of analog model distortion or saturation. So instead, you're just going to get a lot of noise and you're going to get a lot of feedback. Sometimes that can be desirable, especially if you mix it in at very low levels to, again, add a little bit more into your otherwise very plastic composition, because just that little bit extra of noise can sometimes make a very big difference, even if it's not audible to you. Just the fact that it exists down there in the frequency spectrum will make it sound a little bit more real. Think about your everyday life. There's constantly noise going on. There's no rooms that are perfectly silent. So having that little extra ambiance, that little extra noise in the background can work a lot like a glue compressor can work to kind of tie your sounds together. That little extra bit of noise can have a similar effect on one of your compositions. So let's take a look at the Bit-8 effect here. We have our span plugin here, and not sure how much we're really going to need it. There's not going to be a whole lot of logic to what's happening here, but sometimes it is just fun to have that up and to be looking around. So let's play our sine tone here. And already you can hear quite a bit of action going on there. So I'm going to pull the mix to, well, actually, let's pull this frequency up all the way. We'll pull the jitter up all the way. And if we pull this gate through up, I'm pretty sure we're not going to hear any effect. So let's turn the mix up to 50%. And much like with our other distortion device, if we're not getting any effect, it's like we're processing this in parallel. And again, every processor is going to be slightly delayed. So I think we're getting a little bit of phasing going on. And so that's why we're lowering our signal level ever so slightly. But as I pull this gate through back, we're going to start hearing a little bit of this digital distortion. And just like that, you can see a whole lot of action going on there. So this clock setting here is basically representing the sampling rate. Okay, so we have the bit depth and the sample rate. So the sample rate is how many little snapshots are being taken along the waveform. As we bring this down, it's going to be less and less, and so the signal is going to become more and more distorted. And now what the jitter parameter is going to do is when you actually are sampling anything, and we're not talking about sampling like hip hop sampling, I'm talking about digital sampling. So when you're taking snapshots of a wave, occasionally you'll have a problem with jitter where it's not actually taking those samples exactly where they're supposed to be periodically along the wave. And so you'll get these kind of bizarre samples, and that's what causes the jitter. And so jitter is like it sounds. It's like random sample points that just shouldn't exist. So that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. But as you play this back, we can see the jitter having that effect. To no jitter, lots of jitter. All right, the quantized level is going to be affecting like the actual bit depth, all right? So that amount of quality, the amount of choices you have. So you think about like 4-bit music, right? Not as many choices as when you have 16-bit, 24-bit, which can then exponentially multiplies upon itself. We talked about binary form before. I'm not going to go into it again. We'll just increase this quantized level and start to reduce the bits. And now when we combine these together, and we increase the mix all the way. Things start to get a little bit hairy. But now let's listen to this on top of like the chord device, for example, or the chord sample we have. So if I mix this in at a very low level, right, it's barely even perceptible, but it is there, and it is adding a little bit more depth to the actual signal itself. That little bit of random noise is something that as human beings we actually do like. It's quite comforting to us. So to have that in there, especially like on the entire mix at the very end, I wouldn't recommend using the digital distortion device to do that, but maybe using the analog modeled distortion device is a great thing to throw on there right at the very end. Adds a little bit more depth, makes it a little bit more real, and it can help to alleviate that plastic sounding composition that can often happen when you're working inside of a studio, a digital audio workstation like Bitwig, where, you know, we have great synthesizers, we have great effects, but they all sound very digital, they all sound very plastic. So that little bit of noise, that little bit of randomness, and if you were to have this synced up with like an LFO, for example, then what we could do is we could open this up and I could use this LFO to like modulate this clock setting here. And then what I'd probably do is make this quite large and then really slow it down. Let's not use the sample mode, let's use the sine wave. And so this way, what I'm doing is I'm adding a little bit of more randomness to it, which so that way we don't just get that same static sound. It's constantly changing, constantly evolving, much like our everyday life, our everyday world. It's always changing. It's never staying static. So just an idea there. We'll talk a lot more about the modulators in future videos, but for now, I hope you have a good handle on the differences between the distortion device and this Bit-8. One, of course, is supposedly analog modeled, although it still sounds very digital, and the other one is specifically trying to emulate and model digital distortion. So thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you again in the next lesson. Take care.